B, we're going to go on to the next one, is chronic absenteeism. This is an inform item, Mr. Kruth.
Thank you, President Pratt and members of the board. You'll remember we've both at the Joint Site Council and then as we reviewed those findings here at the governing board, looking at some of the changing conditions that we're facing post-pandemic. One of those things is chronic absenteeism. Mr. Hurley, Mrs. Stow, Mrs. Pinkerton, who's not able to be here tonight, and a group of others have been piloting best practices at a few schools to try and tackle that. In particular, what are we doing with Tier 1? So I just wanted to give them an opportunity to do an inform item on what some of that looks like and kind of where we're going. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hurley and Mrs. Stow, or Mrs. Stow and Mr. Hurley, or whoever tags or races to the microphone first.
President Pat, Mr. Kruth, members of the board, I promise this is the last time I'll be at the podium. Tonight. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Kruth. We're really excited to share the work that we've been doing just alongside schools. As Mr. Kruth shared, post-pandemic, we've seen a significant increase in our chronic absenteeism numbers across the district. Not only is this a local trend, but it's a national trend. And it's something that our schools have been trying to tackle in silos. And so we just wanted to come alongside them and see if we could help to build some frameworks to help to support that. So you'll see on the screen, and you've seen this from me before, this multi-tiered system of support with the 3 tiers, and you'll see an arrow pointing at Tier 1. We had a lot of our schools that were really investing good, solid work with our students in Tier 2 who were already hitting that 10% level and categorized as chronically absent. But if we're looking at an MTSS model, we really want to start with Tier 1 first, because we're seeing a high number of kids that are chronically absent in our schools. Our systems and the bandwidth of our staff can't really effectively build and supports for all of the kids that we're seeing chronically absent. So if we're focusing on Tier 1 right now and taking that proactive approach, our goal is to get those numbers down to back to manageable numbers so that we can have those really good systems for Tier 2 and make them manageable for our staff. So that's where we are right now. If you see, we have 4 different steps that we're utilizing in our chronic absenteeism summits. We've worked with 10 schools so far. And we're really looking at problem identifications. Mr. Hurley will share some of the data we're seeing, and we now have a plugin to PowerSchool to make it really easy to access all sort of chronic absenteeism data for our sites. So it just really turns the dashboard a lot more often for our sites so that they can look at that data on a regular basis and analyze what they're seeing with those numbers. And so then after that, we really look at root cause, because chronic absenteeism is very nuanced and there's a lot of different reasons why there are barriers to attendance for our families and our students. And so we'll share some of those with you. And then we go into plan implementation, where schools are really identifying root cause and then building action plans to help address that for Tier 1, for every single student across our campus. And the hope is that we get about 80% of students back in those lower absenteeism numbers, and then we can focus on Tier 2 and Tier 1. And then lastly, incentive systems. We kind of pull that over from our PBIS model, where how are we incentivizing our students to come to school and making it a positive experience for them. I'll turn it over to Mr. Hurley.
So thank you very much. This is the interesting slide because we really focused on chronic absenteeism, because that's a big hot phrase, and that's a school labeling system, and that's something that's out there and been a national problem for years. But one of the things that Mrs. Pinkerton and Mrs. Stow and I realized is principals and site staff have plenty to do already, and they had lots to do before chronic absenteeism was a problem. And so we spent a lot of time digging into research and what are other places doing and what's being successful and what's happening other places. And one of the things we stumbled on is this research from Harvard and Everyday Labs. And a couple key takeaways. You'll see that graph, and what you see from that graph is missing 2 days lowers your scores more than missing 1 day. And missing 3 is more than missing 2. And missing 4 is worse, and missing 10 is worse. So that red line acknowledges this is where the word chronic absentee comes in. The kids on the right side of that are chronically absent. And the takeaway was the kids on the left side, we need to address them too. We don't want to wait until someone is chronically absent. So focusing a lot on the students who aren't there yet. And so that's where we really realized this is a Tier 1 problem. This is an entire school, how do we get, if we can lower chronic absenteeism, great. If we can move kids from 6 to 5, great. 5 to 4. So really trying to address it at the root level of every absence. We want to lower absences. So it really kind of changed our focus. And what we realized is we needed to help sites kind of go through a process that they could implement, they could make their own, and they could realize that our site, it's a little bit different. And so how they can make those things happen. So really the first thing was to identify the problem and try to figure out what is the data and what is the reality. And if you look at that first column, those are our pre-COVID percent numbers. We're still focusing on chronic absenteeism. We haven't got to like per kid per day, but you can see after COVID, everyone almost tripled. Some schools in the last couple of years have gotten better. Some schools have stayed the same, and some schools have gotten worse. Okay, so it was really just a sign that we need some interventions, we need some site-wide plans. So we worked with these schools, we brought another group of schools in, and really tried to get them to focus on what exactly is happening in our school. We'll pick on a school like Acacia, who's been having a little steady drop every year. What did you do? What did you do? What have you done? What can we put more fire on? What can we get more excited about? What can we add to? Some other schools weren't as far along, so really trying to work with them on what is our current reality, what does our data look like, and what are the things we've done that have led to that data? And then from there, we can say, okay, now that we know what the data looks like, we really have to kind of figure out what is causing that data to happen. And that's where we get into the root causes. Research shows these are really the 7 main root causes. The 2 on the bottom, you'll notice, those are really more tier 2 things. We're gonna have the entire school do a campaign. We're gonna send newsletters to everyone. We're gonna do a campaign for the whole school. Well, we're not gonna do something like that for kids who have health issues. Those are tier 2 things. So we looked at the schools and said, figure out which of these you think are happening and most affecting the families at your school. Not every kid and trying to go kid by kid, but in a broad stroke, what are the things that are affecting your school the most? If you could affect one thing, what is the one thing you would pick? And then we allowed schools to say, in our community, this is the thing we think is happening. And a different school could say, this is the thing we think is happening. And so that's what you think is happening at your school. Then we can step into, let's develop a plan to address that. Okay, so this is just an example of one of the schools. If they said, if one of our things was family, well, maybe the principal then could share the importance to parents about why they should come and how attendance matters. And we created these graphs on the side that we could share at parent-teacher conferences, right? It's one thing to say your student has missed X number of days. It's another thing to show a pie chart and show 17% of the days she hasn't been there. And so teachers were able to share with parents, I'm about to go through benchmarks and formatives with you, but you need to know that if she missed 20% of the school days, the benchmarks aren't an indication of how smart she is. They're an indication of what she was able to learn in the time that she was here. So if we can affect the pie chart, then we're going to see benchmarks and formatives get addressed, right? And that's really what we're trying to express to parents is the days that they're sitting in the class, we remember that chart from before, the more days in class, the more days they're learning. So it just allows schools to say, all right, if this is where we want to focus, so if their focus was not family, if their focus was a sense of belonging, they could do things like, let's greet kids at the door, let's have more clubs, let's do more check-in, check-out, let's do those tier 1 things that we're going to do across the whole school. Okay, then like Mrs. Stout talked about, the incentive systems was really a big thing. She's going to talk into it, but if you all remember back to your world, there was ever one incentive ever for attendance, and what was it? Perfect attendance, period, at the end, right? So we're going to talk about what some other options are.
President Pat, Mr. Kruth, members of the board. Yes, we want kids to stay home when they're sick. We're not incentivizing perfect attendance anymore. What we are doing, because we have this Power School data, we can really start to find the trends of when students are missing school. So Desert Sky, for example, they did a pajama party the day after Halloween because they knew that that was a big day, that kids are tired and, you know, sugar hangover. And so they did a pajama party on November 1st, and they said they had a huge increase in attendance across their campus. So they're just looking at different campaigns that they can do. And now that they're turning on the dashboard more often, they can really start to project the trends. Maybe it's a couple days before rodeo break or a couple days before Christmas. And they're really trying to find those fun pieces that will really incentivize kids to attend school. I want to share, we just did a chronic absenteeism summit with Mesquite, and Mrs. Diane Vargo shared an incredible incentive program that she's doing. So they're really starting to look at the kids who are missing a lot of days, and those kids that have improved attendance, they put them into a drawing and she announces it, and then on the spot, they get to go pick a bike at Walmart with Mrs. Vargo. And so it's just the kids, she was sharing, the kids' excitement, and that motivation to be able to just go to Walmart and pick a bike with Mrs. Vargo. So the schools are already doing incredible things and getting really creative about their really, grounding what they're doing in relationships, and kids, show up because of that. So I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Hurley to talk about next step.
Just real quick. So we've done this with 2 sets of schools, about 5 schools each time. And we picked the schools that had the biggest significant increase from pre-COVID to post-COVID. You saw some of those schools. When you were below 10%, you were already a school that you could just address those students with tier 2 things. And now that they're so much bigger, we tried to figure out which schools had the highest priority. So we did a group of 5 and then another group of 5. So the next steps is to bring more schools in, and at a small enough group so that we can work with them one-on-one and try to bring a team of people. It's not the principal's job to fix this. It's the principal, it's the attendance clerk, it's the SST, it's the SSA, it's everyone on campus that can pull through on this and help. So we're doing small groups. Then we're gonna get to high school. High school is a bit more complicated. In K-8, you only take attendance twice a day. So everyone's either fully absent or fully present or half. And then some of our kids in high school, we take attendance 7 times. So if a kid shows up late or leaves early, then are they absent that day? Are they present that day? Some days it's a lot more complicated. So we're put the low hanging fruit. And once we have a system down for this, it'll be easier to implement at high schools. And then we're really excited that we can start rolling out the tier 2 practices. Right now that we've addressed these things, we've hopefully lowered the numbers down to a little bit where we can start having some interventions, where we can start working with kiddos and saying, hey, it seems like this is the issue. How can we help? What are things that we can do? So instead of doing a tier 1, the whole school, we're giving everyone a sense of belonging. We can work with one kiddo and say, hey, what's going on and how can I help you get here? Is it a sense of purpose? Is there a family thing we can help with? Is it safety? Do you need we can get into those things, but you can't do that when the tier 1 numbers are just too big. So we're excited to shrink those down and then start working with them on some specific tier 2 stuff. That's what we got. You got any questions for us?
Thank you. Comments or questions? Mr. King.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hurley, for this. If you can go back a couple slides where you had the schools up and with the numbers on them, are those the number of students or is that the percentage of the student body that's chronically absent?
Mr. Hurley.
President Pat, Mr. Crew, members of the board, those are the percentage of students who are chronically absent. So you see that year after COVID, it was a third of the student body was missing.
So, and that's represented as missing 10% of the school period of time. So per semester for the year. So.
I was talking to, as a substitute teacher, I was talking to our office staff today, and there's a student that's missed already at this point over 50 days.
Yeah.
So they're not learning anything at that point. So seeing this actually puts numbers to it. And that's.
Thank you. Mr. King. Any other comments or questions as to that?
I appreciated the opportunity to look at kind of those different reasons and allow schools to kind of select their area of focus and ways to work with families there on their campus. I also think we knew that we weren't focusing on families or children who were experiencing illness and encouraging people to ignore those kinds of things. We know that there's a lot more reasons that kids miss school, and that list kind of really captures kind of all of those different reasons and ways that schools can partner with families to help address those for the student and for better outcomes for the student. Not so that we have kids in classrooms, but so the student has the opportunity to capture that learning that is missed in those days. So thanks for the comprehensive presentation.
If I might add, President Pratt, that's exactly the point that we're trying to make. We can spend an inordinate amount of time doing academic remediation, but for students who are chronically absent, the academic remediation is making sure that they come to school. And how do we fix that? Because yes, they need to have that learning, but unless they're there, we can't. That's the first step. So it's just a really important components.
Thank you. Great point, Mrs. Tippett. Thank you. Mr. King?
Can we get a quarterly update to see where we're at and see if we're actually trying to reverse these trends for all schools, not just these 5 that are selected?
Great. Thank you. Mr. Gray?
President Pat, members of the board, might I suggest, I think a quarterly update might be a little too granular, just because where our trends, I think at semesters might be a better reflection, because I think you'd see a trend at that point. I mean, I think, I'm not sure, that might be a little too frequent to notice up or down trends. And one of the things that Mr. Hurley and the others have pushed into, this is a multi-year problem. This is to get this back on track is going to take a multi-year effort. It's not something that, we put these things in place and poop, they're just gone next year. It's going to be, it takes time and effort. What is it, 3 to 5 year windows, what the average is to begin reversing
we were part
trends?
of a national group that said their suggestion was to look at a 5-year window to drop it in half.
Yeah.
That wouldn't even put a lot of our schools back to where they were if we waited 5 years. And it's to what Mrs. Tippett brought up, there's just so many reasons.
Yeah.
But it's not, so a tier 1 is great and it will lower the number, but then it's really getting through to the one-on-ones. And so, yeah, I think having a long enough time, I think you're absolutely right, a long enough time that we can look at some data in chunks instead of week by week.
Yeah. And I also just want to add, this is, we're having an overview of the program and kind of the things that we're pushing into to help reverse these trends and improve the numbers so students can learn. We've also been doing quite a bit with social media. I've written about it in the parent newsletter and some other places. There's some I know there's some question of why are we calling attention to this as an issue, and I'll just simply state emphatically we're calling attention to it because being present, one, that's a life skill, when especially in regard to a job and showing up, being present is something that's critically important. I'm not sure you'd have me if I was chronically absent from my post as superintendent, as an example. But the other most important reason is research is so clear about the impact to learning, and it's good to get that information out. So I just simply say, we're going to continue to push into what was discussed here tonight and expand on that. And we're going to continue to do some public, in particular, targeting at parents, just as a reminder. I think that's a simple statement about what the importance is. And sometimes we've just forgotten that. And, work trends have changed a little bit. And although I think that's trending back to more people being back in the office than it was. So it was just a little easier to say, oh, you don't need to go. But what we're seeing and what, again, nationally, what you're seeing is, when there's a dip in scores, people want to point to what the instruction is in the classroom, which there's some truth to that. But if there's a dip in scores because you got 30% of your students who are chronically absent, that's an area we can improve. And frankly, that's an area that parents should be helping us on. I mean, and we should be partnering with them on reversing that trend.
Any other comments or questions? I really appreciate, sorry, I'm so sorry, Mr. Bester.
You were
No,
starting your
please.
point.
No, please. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I was looking at, I guess, similarly to what Mr. King had to say. So what we're doing is we're employing different types of tools to encourage a curb in this behavior, a curb in this negative trend. So what is going to be the delta that says, hey, we're not moving the bar, let's try a new tool? What is going to be the catalyst that, what is that piece that says, this has not encouraged a positive trend, now we need to try this new thing?
Mr. Hurley or Mrs. Stow?
President Pat, Mr. Kruth, members of the board, I think that's a benefit of having this Power School plugin where we can easily access the data and turn on the dashboard more often. And so we have these root causes and they're only a hypothesis. And so we'll try these action plans for a certain time, but monitor data closely. And if we see over a significant amount of time, because I think some of this is just long game. But if we see after a certain period of time that it's not effective, we can go back and look at our hypothesis and deem maybe we need to choose a different root cause or layer something else on to be able to move the needle.
Any follow-up questions?
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I don't know what the exact trigger is, Mr. Buster, but because I don't know that we've implemented these things long enough to really understand what that is. I think we'll just need to look at those, monitor the data, and if they're not moving, then we'll really dig into what those pieces are. That's at a tier 1 level, so we're looking at all students. I'll also add, for years now, and we've been one of the first to do that, we've looked at, we call kind of our big 5 data that we track. That's academic progress, behavioral progress, academics across various test scores, whether that's our own benchmarks or state assessments. But we've asked, and one of the things I was adamant about when I was over in special education, we look at attendance, because we at an individual level. So when if a student is doing well, and those 5 indicators should also be doing well. But when a student isn't doing well, grades are an indicator. But if if the test scores are down, or is it because they're chronically absent? And where are we applying that individual remediation for that student? So there's the global piece, and then there's the individual piece. I think it's going to really take, it's just us looking at all of those factors and making that happen. I mean, whether it's the pajama party or Desert Willow did a character race on the day before Christmas it was hysterical, by the way. The video is really hysterical to have kids come in. I think there's simple things like, it's from that to looking at individual absences.
Sorry, President Pratt, Mr. Creed, members of the board, one thing I just wanted to add to that is all of these things are happening in all of our schools.
Yeah.
All of these root causes are present at all of our schools. And several kids have several of these root causes. So there is no switch to flip that we fixed it. It's trying to move people out of the pile that don't really have tier 2 issues or problems that we need to address. It's communication, it's understanding, it's information. There are plenty of parents out there that when they hear the tier 1 information, will go, oh, okay, well, we'll start following along. Maybe we'll do the Disneyland trip later. Maybe we'll say no to this soccer trip to Utah and say yes to, and then we can get to the people who really have tier 2 problems that we need to address. So our plan is that this is a long fight that we're in, and to support families into why it's important to come is the first thing. And then how can we help you get here is the next step we've got to get. So what schools are picking is the thing that they think is probably most prevalent and most likely, but they're all there. And so it's a lot, and we are really poised well to support these things because of the stuff Mrs. Stow's department has done with PBIS and adding counselors and adding student services coordinators, and we now have way more supports and care solace and all of the things than we had pre-COVID. So the good news is we have the tools to do this, but it's definitely going to be lots of work to get it done.
I think the campaign to make awareness to parents that attending school, even missing 2 days, has an impact. 4 days has an impact is really what we're after. Part of the argument is, well, my kid is getting A's and B's. Why would I not send them to school? Well, grades in many ways are frankly a little bit different than performance on benchmark assessments and performance on state assessments of, proficiency and highly proficient. And what we're looking at is, because so many other factors make up grades, right? Can you get the assignment done? Can you do some of these other pieces? But what is your performance? Look at reading performance. What's your reading performance on a state assessment? What's your reading performance on our benchmark assessments? That, we can have kids get good grades and be at the low end of proficiency or, the upper end of, minimally, underperforming or minimally proficient. It's because you can do other things to create a grade. It's looking at all of those things. And I think if we talk to parents and make awareness that it's not just a grade that you're after or completing an assignment that you missed, it's really having a deep understanding of the content that's being presented and how, as your student, as your child, grasping that information and retaining it. Those things come by being present in school and being present over time. So that's another reason it just takes some time.
Yeah, Mr. Bester.
I guess my last question. So with all these tools and we're employing them and we're having conversations with parents, is this receptive to parents? Because obviously they're going to be part of that formula that gets kids back into school, and we can counterbalance what we're seeing in regards to these metrics.
Yeah.
Right, Commissioner Crew.
Thank you, President Pratt, members of the board. I think parents are largely receptive to it. That's been our experience and our exposure. I'm also if you're on our Facebook page, you probably have seen some pushback on some of those things. I understand that everybody has we're not gonna, any campaign isn't gonna, convince everybody that what the importance is. What we're trying to communicate is these are the root causes, the reasons that we're focused in on this, and that's why we're pounding on that path. And I think parents are largely very supportive. And we're doing it multifaceted. The work that has been presented here tonight is what our staff's doing internally with our schools to turn those needle. Our communication department is also putting some content out there just to make awareness. I'm writing about it. To make awareness. I just think so. It's kind of a multifaceted approach, and we have largely been receptive. I think when parents understand better what their role in this can be, then they'll be helpful. And not helpful. Then they'll understand the importance of maybe that's not the day. Maybe we can wait till rodeo break to take that off, or maybe we can schedule that over Easter. It's not to say if it's something that comes up and you pull your kid occasionally that there's anything wrong with that. We're not in any way saying, this is the no fun campaign. This is the no life campaign. What we're saying is just you need to make decisions, informed decisions about what missing school means for us. No different than we do at work, right? And when do we schedule things and how do you show up? Those are the kinds of things we want to bring attention to. And then how are we creating systems that encourage that at schools?
I know not everybody, maybe if they're watching online, I'm not sure that they can see the PowerPoints. Do we know if they're able to see? Okay. I think what I really appreciate most is that that you're looking at these root causes to say, okay, what can we fix? How can we support these students? How can we support families? And then acknowledging to say there are reasons, health reasons, things like that, that we're not saying that you're doing it any different than you should. Plus, there are, depending on health concerns or maybe issues that students are having during a year, there are alternatives as far as, maybe doing it online for a quarter or something like that. That we can support students and families better. So thank you so much for just really looking at what I would say the whole child and really the whole family, and then how can we support them. For me as a parent, I think I've always thought about attendance things as, Logan's doing fine, his grades are good, and, kind of feeling like, oh, you're not talking to me, until this year and reading the messages that you've been putting out, seeing the research on how important this is, maybe it's really hit me as a parent to say, okay, you are talking to me too. You're talking to all families, and to hear your message just now about it's not only grades that are affected. So I appreciate this. For us, we've had some funny conversations this year. Logan asks on a regular basis, oh, can you pick me up early? Can I just stay home with you today? And so we've had these conversations of, Logan, how important attendance is. So anyways, I appreciate the work on this. So thank you so much. Oops, I'm sorry, Mr. Buster.
Just a point of information. You reference MTSS model. What does that stand for?
Multi-tiered system of support.
Excellent, thank you.
That's a little cheat sheet for the Vail Pride Day, the acronym. Game that we're gonna play. Okay, we'll all remember that.
Screening to enhance equitable placement. There's just dropping a little Easter egg for those on there who may not know. If you write it down, you may get it.
Okay, very rich discussion. Thank you so much for your work on this. Is there any other comments or are there any more other comments, questions? Thank you so much for this. We will move on to our next agenda item, item C,